everybody. It's Andrea Ankrum with Indivisible Northern Kentucky District 4's Coffee Klatch Conversations with Candidates. This is where you get to know your candidate by them answering some questions that we've developed. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to send us your questions and we'll get them to your candidate. So I'm happy to welcome our candidate for today, Susan Back, District 61. Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for office?
All right, thanks. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for everyone who's tuning in or who will watch this later. I'm Susan Back. I'm running for state representative for District 61. Just a little bit about myself. I have been married for 15 years. We have 2 little boys, and we're the owners of Finer Piner Farms in Southern Kenton County. I've lived in Southern Kenton County for 38 years, and so I have a deep connection with the Southern community and the agriculture community in that area. I graduated from Georgetown College in 2002 with a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology, and I began my first job as the Youth Service Center coordinator. During that time, I was working on my master's from the University of Kentucky in the area of social work. Upon graduation from the University of Kentucky, I then got my Kentucky School Social Work degree, and I became a guidance counselor. So I've actually been a high school guidance counselor for the last 12 years. So I'd like to say I definitely believe in public education, and that's really why I'm running, is to protect public education, to discuss pensions, and make sure that we have that funding to ensure that we have a bright future for the state of Kentucky. So with that.
Okay, great. So that leads me into my first question, right? Senate Bill 1, which is on everybody's mind. What are your thoughts about the pension issue, including how they should be funded and the future of the pension system in Kentucky? Do you agree with what the governor is proposing? And if not, what would you propose instead?
Well, I am definitely opposed of Senate Bill 1. When we signed up to be public servants, whether it's an educator, your firefighters, your police officer, your city clerk, your social workers, we were promised a pension. Right. And we have been doing our part. We have funded that. 13% of my pay actually goes towards the pension and the health care. So to me, I've done my due diligence, and it's my expectation that the state does their due diligence. And they have to find the funding, and we have to look at some options for that funding. No one likes to talk about tax reform. I mean, no one wants to talk about the cigarette tax. No one wants to talk about like a gas tax. Mm-hmm. But really, we have to bring more revenue into our state to honor those commitments that we've made to individuals and for the future of education. Right. I know my nephew is getting ready to graduate from Morehead State University with a teaching degree, and he just got engaged, announced it today to the family. So, we're really excited about that. And I think about his future. Mm-hmm. My career is, 15 years into education. I'm halfway through my career. But I think about his career and what a quality teacher that he'll be. And we have to make sure that we have quality educators in our classroom, and so we have to protect the future teachers and the generation after them to make sure that our students have that quality education.
Right. We don't want them leaving. I mean, there are options all around us, and if they see that right across the river, hey, it's...
Yeah, absolutely. Ohio, Indiana's right here. Right. You can go to Tennessee. There's so many options out there, but, we have to keep quality teachers in our state because the labor... council, the labor workforce, they're expecting us to produce those quality workers. And so if you don't have a quality education, what is our workforce going to look like?
Right, absolutely. So Senate Bill 241 proposes a constitutional amendment that would allow casino gambling and require 100% of proceeds to go to funding retirement systems. Would you be in support of this type of amendment, or what are some other types of funding that, what are some other sources of funding that you could think about that would help the pension system?
When I think about casino gambling, we already have racetracks, we already have the lottery system. Would it really generate more profit for us? I don't really know, just because there's so many already out there, especially in our area with going over to Indiana or Ohio. Would we just be recreating the wheel? And would we really get a market for that? Because some people already have that relationship, or would it really be sustainable income for the state of Kentucky? What I like to look at is I like to work with the Agricultural Council to say, we have all these great farms, and what can we do to get a product from the field to the table? I'm very involved in the food to table movement, that grassroots efforts. We raise grass-fed beef, and so we're always trying to find that market on how to get our product to the consumer, to keep the costs effective for middle-class families, to make sure it's healthy, but then also just really trying to have that open market. And so I think that's something we can definitely look at, is how do we get our product to the consumer.
Okay. So Governor Bevin's budget would cut funds from public education. And House Bill 134 gave tax credits for private school tuition. This would take away from public school tax money. And give to charter schools. Right now we have this charter school. What are your ideas to support funding of our public education system in Kentucky, and what are your thoughts on charter schools and tax credits for private school tuition?
Well, what I like to say is that's one of the first things I would want to do if I was elected is repeal charter schools. Why would we create charter schools when we have such a great public education system in the state of Kentucky? And instead of funding us fully, they've pulled funds to fund these charter schools that don't have any accountability on them. And so that's the question, like, what is the point of that?
Right.
And so I'm definitely opposing of charter schools. I know I have a lot of friends that, some of their kids go to private schools, some go to public, and you always have that debate of private versus public. I just think if you choose to send your child to private school, that is a decision that you made with your family. Right. But we still have a responsibility to fund our public schools because not every family can afford that private tuition.
Exactly.
So I know that's a quandary, public versus private, but I really believe in public education and what we offer students.
So would you want to repeal the tax credits for private school tuition as well?
I wouldn't say
or look
repeal
at
it. Just look at maybe look at it closer. I don't think repealing because they need the tuition. That's kind of their decision, and but I just think it's something we have to fund the public education.
This is a specific question from one of our members. What are your thoughts on charter school plans and what that might mean for students with severe disabilities?
What I like to say about students with severe disabilities is the public school system does a really good job of addressing those students and their needs, developing those individual education plans to say this is a student's deficit and what are we going to do to get them to the level they need to be successful in our workforce or a 2-year college or 4-year college, whatever it is they want to do. And so, I hate any funding that's going to be removed from public education because we are, in my opinion, the best place for students.
Right. Okay. So what are your thoughts? We're going to move on to marijuana, hemp, and legalization of those. What are your thoughts on medical marijuana, bringing businesses and jobs into the state, and using these revenues for education? And in the same way, what about legal recreational marijuana, and then hemp as well, the hemp industry, as a new way to bring revenues into the state?
Well, I'd like to say, regarding hemp, there's not really a large market for hemp right now for farmers to really have that as the next cash crop.
But do you think that's because nobody's growing it and we're not allowed to grow it? So what would come first, the growing or the demand for growing?
I just think right now, hemp is a product that is used in a variety of things, and that market's already saturated. So I don't really know if that would be a great revenue for us. I know that the agriculture has kind of looked at that to see if that's a good cash crop to bring into Kentucky, but I just know it's just not really there right now. My opinion on recreational marijuana is I'm always going to be against recreational marijuana. Recreational marijuana is a gateway to other drugs usage, and so I just cannot see myself ever voting to legalize recreational marijuana. Medical marijuana, I know there's some value to medical marijuana. My fear is that when you say yes, we're going to allow medical marijuana, there's no guidelines on it, who prescribes it, how do they get access to it, then you open up that door to allow recreational marijuana. And so I'd have to definitely do some more research on the medical marijuana. But if there was anything that was attached to medical marijuana, like to have medical marijuana, we'd have to have recreational marijuana. I'm definitely opposed to that.
Got it. What about growing marijuana, even if it's not legal for consumption here, but then selling it to Colorado or California?
I just have a real ethical problem with that. I work with a lot of students who tell me all the time, Miss Beck, it's just a little marijuana. And I don't mean like tons of students, but you hear it's just a little marijuana. And if you ever worked in drug counseling at all, individuals will tell you it just started out with a little marijuana and now they're using heroin. And I don't think anyone ever thought with just a little recreational marijuana I would now be a heroin user. Okay.
So leading in then to the opioid crisis, there's multiple factors that are involved with this, and big pharma, physicians overprescribing, and then the need for alternative pain medications. We need alternative therapies. What are your thoughts and ideas for combating this epidemic in Kentucky?
We do definitely have the opiate crisis going on in the state of Kentucky and even here in northern Kentucky. And, what I like to focus on more is our students and our children who are living in this crisis environment, this traumatic type of lifestyle. And really, to me, we always want to talk about the addict and what are we doing for the addict or how are we combating the addict, but we never really focus a whole lot about those silent victims, which is their children or even their relatives, or they're now raising their children. And so to me, we really have to focus on like how are we going to support these kids through these really traumatic lifestyles that have traumatized them. They've seen things that a child should never have to see. So how do we make sure that they have good mental health services? How do we ensure we have quality social workers that are able to make those to advocate for them at the judicial level to say, listen, like this kid has to be removed from their home, and then having quality foster homes to actually allow these students to have quality homes. I shouldn't just say students, but when you're in education, everyone's a student. But I really mean like children, youth of the Commonwealth.
So, but would you consider any kind of regulation on pharmaceutical companies or physicians to try to, it seems like, I'm not sure exactly specifics towns in Kentucky, but there's been reports on so many opioids pouring into these small towns, and there's not even enough. I mean, there's so much more for the population. Would you consider regulating or looking at those avenues or those factors in this crisis?
I absolutely think that we have to look at everything to try to determine what's the cause of this. And, I definitely think there should be a leveling. I don't think you should just go in and say, oh, I have this injury. Okay, let's start you at the very top class drug to
There's some morphine or
whatever. So I do think, we have to taper up, and we do have to regulate, and we do have to make sure, that people aren't over-prescribing, and, how do we determine who is seeking out the opiates because now they're addicted versus just someone who has a chronic illness.
Right. Okay, back to higher education. Higher education costs are skyrocketing. The average college student ends up tens of thousands of dollars in debt upon graduating from college. And then teachers as well have to go back and get their master's degree. Then they have to pay for that as well. So do you have any solutions for this crisis? And how can the Kentucky government support our students in their pursuit of higher education?
I think one of the greatest things that's happening right now in our educational system is the dual enrollment classes. Right now, those are at a reduced cost to students and families, and the colleges are working really well with the school districts to offer those courses on campus or allowing them to come to campus at that lower reduction. And I know Kia is allowing students to, at least in our district, seniors typically get 2 classes paid for by the state of Kentucky. So, might be an English 101 or a psychology class, but really trying to look at those options and make sure they're available for our current students. I also, not every student's going to go to college, and so I think it's important to work with your business communities and those apprenticeship programs. Like, how do we get students to apply for those apprenticeship programs? How do we get the skilled laborers out into the workforce? And just really making sure that the school system has the resources to make the connections for the students and helping them apply for all these different programs, 2-year degrees, 4 years degree, or going to an apprenticeship program.
Right. I just remember when my older son was in high school, they did offer the dual enrollment where the NKU would come to the school, but they had a limited number of students that they would allow to do it on campus. And so that was he didn't make it into that. And so how can we need to be able to expand some of these where these kids want to do it, but the opportunities aren't there.
Some of our students, class sizes are limited in the high school level, but, Northern, Thomas More, Gateway, in the Northern Kentucky area, and I'm sure it's across the state as well, if students are able to drive to those facilities, they can take classes on campus. And so we really work with their schedule structure to say, okay, tell me what class you're going to take and tell me what, okay, this would fit in here. And so then it looks like if you do this, then, that does meet the criteria for this credit for graduation. And so really working with that student on a one-on-one basis with their family to say, like, these are some options. Is this doable for your family?
So we talked a little bit about the skilled workers or the kids who aren't going to college, right? Some of the unemployment numbers in Kentucky is due to the lack of skilled workers. Here in Northern Kentucky, our economy is booming. How do we ensure that we have enough skilled workers in this area to support our growing economy? So there's the high school students, but there's also the workers that are displaced or they've been laid off from somewhere and now they need to, be retrained. And I think that's the problem we're running into sometimes is these retraining programs. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think businesses definitely always believe in the educational system, and I think that's where where, post-secondary ed comes in. That's so important. Businesses partner up with Gateway to say, this is what we need. How do we get our employees to you for you to train them in this new skill so that we can, help them obtain this career or move through our company at a faster pace to ensure that they have the skills that they need.
What are some incentives that you would offer to businesses? Do you think they need incentives from the government, or are they just going to do this themselves? Because they're always looking for help, right? On some of these.
Right.
Would there be an initiative to kind of push some of these from the government?
I think we'd have to research that, like what kind of, incentives could we give them, since we have such a shortfall right now in our budget of Kentucky, and that gets hard. Like, you always want to help someone, and so they'll help us. But we really have to look at that closely and say, can we give you, some kind of tax break, or what can we do to really help you? But, I think every time that I meet with the Labor Council or these different groups that I sit on because of my job, they always are like, we will pay them to get their education. We pay kids to do this. We pay adults to do this. If you can get them to apply, teach them the soft skills, be on time, put their cell phones away.
Right.
Just if you'll do these things, then we have the money to support this.
Okay. And what about the loss of vocational schools that are adding to this problem? So if those are shut down, we can't continue to do this.
Yes. So I really, I think education is always a pendulum. Like, there was that school of thought that everyone's going to a four-year college, which I've never been in favor of that every student's going to a four-year college, because I work with students. That is not realistic at all. And so, I know, like in our district, we don't have those traditional skills that you're thinking of, like welding, heating and air conditioning.
So you don't have that at your high school?
Yeah, we don't have that. But what we do have is we have that partnership with Gateway.
Got it.
And we're able to allow students to get the skills that they need. I can't say enough great things about Gateway, to be honest.
Right.
And they have smart plans that tell the students, you take this, this, and this, and you've earned the certificate. Businesses know that. They're looking for employable individuals coming out of that school.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about right to work, because that affects many things here in Kentucky, and we are now a right to work state. It is anti-union. It unions protect workers by having the ability to collective bargain, and when their union's power to collective bargain is reduced, that affects everybody really. What are your thoughts on Kentucky adopting a right to work environment, and how? What would you do about this if you were elected?
First of all, I'd like to say that I am a member of the KEA, so I'm a part of the teacher union. My husband is a lineman for OWN Electric, and so he's a member of the IBEW, the electrical workers. So we are definitely a union-focused family, and so the right to work, I definitely feel like that needs to be appealed, and we need to look at prevailing wage again, because prevailing wage ensures the cost of jobs, the payment for the service that you give a client, and that really affects our middle class family and their home life, and what, paying their bills and the opportunities they're able to offer their own children or offer their own families. And so I definitely think we have to support prevailing wage, and we have to support our local unions. The great things about unions is, everybody will say, well, what about this or what about that? But, the whole goal of his union is to be a communicator with a business or a company to say, okay, this is what our workers need to have a safe environment. This is what our workers need, based on our pay, based on the jobs that we do. And so the union's really that communicator. And most unions have a healthy relationship with their business. So I just think the unions do a lot of great work for us, and they always have, and they always will. And so I think that we have to support prevailing wage and support our unions.
Would you work towards a repeal of the right to work?
I would work towards that.
So minimum wage, Senate Bill 17 would increase the minimum wage for many workers to $10 per hour by 2020. Do you support this, and do you think it's enough?
I think it's one of those things where we have to look at the data to say, like, can our economy actually support a minimum wage of being $10 an hour? And I always think of minimum wage jobs as entry-level positions that we give 18, 19-year-olds who are still living at home. I think it's hard for a 40-year-old to enter into a job making $10 an hour. Like, how I honestly don't know how you survive off that. How do you provide rent, especially in Northern Kentucky where there's not a lot of affordable housing? How do you make a rent payment, or how do you make a house payment? You can't. So, now you're looking at individuals who are doubled up, living in, situations where there's multiple adults in the same home. And so I think that's something we have to look at. First of all, can our economy sustain a $10 a wage increase? And then really, and like I said, I always think of minimum wage as teenagers. Like, this is what teenagers make.
It's not.
I know it's not. And so then you think $10 an hour, like.
Yeah. That's a lot for them.
That's a lot
right?
for them, but that's not a lot for someone who's in their 30s or 40s.
Or trying to support a family.
Supporting a family.
And there's some of these larger businesses, chain businesses, Walmart, for one, that probably could afford it, but then there's other smaller businesses that might affect them. So
yeah, I definitely think we just have to research that more and do what's best for the citizens of Kentucky. And like I said, I don't know how you afford, even at 25, how do you afford living on $10 an hour?
Right, or seven. I mean, right now it's $7 an hour. So exactly. Oh, you have two jobs.
Right.
House Bill 29 is a comprehensive tax modernization bill, and this is trying to make Kentucky tax system more fair by lowering taxes for low and moderate income families, reinstating the estate sales tax, raising tax on cigarettes, and expanding sales tax to luxury services, close loopholes on corporations, and add an earned income credit. Do you support these proposed tax changes? And do you think these proposals will be passed by the current legislative body?
I think we have to look at tax reform, and so we're going to have to do something. And so, if I do support tax reform, and these are some ways that we can get some more revenue to our state to fund the programs that matter. So I'm okay with that. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
Do you think that these proposals will be passed by the current legislative body?
This is where I struggle, because as a teacher, as an educator, we have stood up to Senate Bill 1, and I feel like ever since we've stood up to Senate Bill 1, it's almost like, well, you didn't pass this, so we're not going to help you out now. We're not going to do anything. And so I think it's really hard for me to say, like, oh, I think that they're going to do what's best for the citizens of Kentucky, because I just don't feel that right now.
Yeah.
And so I guess we will see what they will do, but
Right. Pretty soon we'll see.
Well, pretty soon we will see, but I'm not hopeful, I think.
House Bill 372 is the anti-marriage equality bill. Would allow social service and housing discrimination against same-sex married couples. If you are elected, what would you do to ensure that Kentucky does not discriminate against anyone, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation?
I think the thing that we have to do is we have to be respectful to everyone. Everyone comes from different walks of life. Everyone has different background stories. And so, this is 2018. We should be respectful of everyone. And I think that's what it all comes down to, is respecting each other and respecting our different walks, and being able to say, sometimes we're not going to agree on everything, but I still respect you as an individual, and I respect you as a person.
So you would oppose this House Bill 372 and stand up against it, and basically speak out against it?
Yeah.
Those types of bills.
Those types of bills, because like I said, I have Christian beliefs, and so, I believe in Christian marriage, but at the same token, I think you have to be respectful towards individuals, and you're supposed to love people, and we have to do things to ensure that we are respectful to other people. And, I don't want someone to disrespect me because of my Christian beliefs, just like I don't want to disrespect somebody because of something that they don't believe in. We all have to be respectful towards each other. And
Absolutely. Okay. Reproductive rights. Many bills being presented in the legislature right now will limit women's reproductive health rights. We feel like we're under attack. What is your stance on a woman's right to choose what is best for her reproductive health? Here in Northern Kentucky, St. Elizabeth has taken over our healthcare system, and they will not perform some procedures due to a Catholic belief, such as tubal ligation. So how do we make sure that women still have, we're still in control of our reproductive rights?
I think that's something, I kind of forgot that St. Elizabeth doesn't allow that.
I know. I know. You don't have to
go. Forgot it. Yeah, I kind of forgot about that. But I think the thing that we have to do is, we have to keep educating women about their physical health, and talk about ways to protect yourself for unplanned pregnancies, and
so really, like a prevention.
Really talk about prevention, and educating women about how to access healthcare, affordable healthcare. I think that's really important. I just think it's something that we have to educate. And I also think too, people, they always want to talk about this, or this issue, like, well, what about this, or what about this scenario, or this could happen. I've had friends that have had some pregnancies that have not ended well because a baby has physiological problems going on. My friends have chosen to carry out their pregnancy, and even though it wasn't a viable birth, that was their choice. And you watch them go through the grief process, and you watch them do that. And I just think something that was really helpful is a new program that's coming up that I have a really good friend that's involved in. It's called the Rachel's Gift. And it's really working with women who have these difficult choices, and they don't have that viable birth, but they love that child.
Right.
And so just really working through their grief and trying to find funding to kind of figure out, like, well, why does things still happen for that?
So that kind of leads me to the question about health care. We're talking about, access to health care for women. What are your thoughts on single-payer health care? And even in the state of Kentucky, we have a high percentage of people on Medicaid, and the governor is trying to put some restrictions on that now. So what are your thoughts on a single-payer system, and then on the Medicaid restrictions?
I think, if you talk to anyone that's been in the medical profession for a long time, they'll tell you we've turned into a business. Right. We no longer care about the client. Not that the doctors don't care, the nurses, but they're not able to really care because there's this, you only have 10 minutes with a patient, and you only get this much time, and you have to do this decision, you have to make that decision, and start here. And so I think, our healthcare system, it's in crisis, and we have to continue to work on it to make it to better, and we have to find affordable healthcare. And so we need to look at different alternatives to say, like, hey, how do we make healthcare affordable for everyone?
Right.
And I hate to see someone at their most vulnerable state say, you no longer qualify for healthcare.
Right. I think that's what's going to happen, is what's going to come up with some of these Medicaid, restrictions.
Right.
So, okay, we're going to move on to House Bill 227. It's an anti-solar bill. It would reward monopoly utility companies and punish consumers. If passed, it would put rooftop solar out of reach for most Kentuckians. Kentucky needs to keep up with the rest of the country in terms of clean, green energy. What would you do to help protect and promote the use of clean energy?
Clean energy, it's not affordable at this point. It's still out of that reach. I mean, if we went to clean energy, you're talking about your electric bill going up by hundreds of dollars.
Well, because you have to put in all this money ahead of time.
You have to put all this money, and then even like the electric coming back, it's still not affordable at this time.
Right.
And I think that we have to continue to fund research through the universities to say, like, how do we make this more affordable so that we can transform our homes? So I think we have to continue to fund the educational side of it, the research side of it, to make it so that consumers are able to afford.
Well, they're trying right now with this bill is they want to, not offer the tax credits anymore, and that would, force people not to be able to get it as well. Yes. So would you still put these types of bills in place where we could get some tax credits and things like that for clean, green energy?
I think we still have to look at clean energy. It's not something that we can just say, like, oh, well, we can afford it right now, so let's pass the boat on it. I think you have to continue to find and give opportunities for people to grow that idea and to find affordable ways to have clean energy in the state of Kentucky for the consumer.
Right. Okay, now we're going to talk about guns.
Okay.
This is a hot topic.
It's a hot topic.
It is. In Kentucky, a lot of people own guns, so I think that, this is a lot of people are paying attention to this because it affects a lot of people.
Correct.
So should Kentucky have stricter gun ownership laws? And what do you think about assault rifles being banned? That's kind of being called for nationally. How do you feel about that here in Kentucky?
I have my carried and concealed, which I think a lot of Kentuckians do, especially when you live on a farm. It's part of being a farmer. Farmer, it is protecting your herd. It's kind of something that we all do. And so, I believe in the Second Amendment. But I do think with today's culture, we have to go back to the data. We have to go back and research and say, what's going on that people are able to buy these types of weapons and then they are using them against the public. So I think we have to do more research and kind of figure out, like, what's the commonalities, like what's going on.
So would you propose, here in Kentucky, you would propose funding studies, because nationally we haven't allowed to do that. So would you push for studies done here in Kentucky?
I think we have to look at it. I mean, and like I said, I believe in the Second Amendment, and I also have my carry and concealed license. But the same token, we need to see, do these policies match up with today's society? And there's so many players here with school shootings and looking at it. And I think what we can't do is we can't continue just to play the blame game, like, oh, it's this person, or oh, it's this issue, or oh, it's this reason. We have to really look at the data from these school shootings and these other, not just school shootings,
Right,
but even
because
like
they
the shooting that
happen
happened in
in
Vegas.
other places.
Right,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly.
What does the data show? And then we probably do need to look at some policy and say, is there policies that need to be changed that meets today's society?
So if you were elected, would this be something that you would bring up and try to introduce legislation about gun, kind of looking at the gun situation?
If I was elected, what I would be focusing more on when it comes to school safety is how do we get more resource officers in our schools, or retired vets, individuals who are trained, that have that skill level to deal with an active shooter. To me, that's what I would be focusing more on.
What about the stricter gun ownership laws? So I know that some people say that it's so easy to go and buy a gun. Do you think that those should be a little bit stricter here in Kentucky?
I think the thing that's hard with buying guns is, a lot of times, like, someone does follow the procedures to buy a gun, but then they, somebody's like, oh, well, I'll give you $300 for that gun, and then we sell it
right.
from our homes.
Do you think that should be allowed?
So, that's always a tricky one because...
I don't know how much it's done, but
yeah, I mean, I think that's always a tricky one. It's kind of like the barter system sometimes.
It's like a loophole. Like,
it's kind of like a loophole.
Through that, and I think that's what a lot of people are worried about. Are these where you can just sell a gun to somebody and there is no background check?
Right.
That makes us not as safe, maybe. So,
so I think it's something we just have to keep looking at the data. What we can't say is we're never going to look at this.
Right. Exactly. We can't
say, like,
sweep it under the rug.
Sweep it under the rug. Like, I think we do have to address it. We do have to look at it. We have to protect the Second Amendment in the same process, but we also need to make sure our policies match today's society.
Right. So we'll talk about guns in schools. What are your thoughts about arming teachers in public schools? And do you have some alternative ideas? You kind of talked about the resource officers, but, do you think that teachers should have guns in school?
We are asked to do so much as educators already.
Right.
I just don't want that responsibility. That's my personal belief. Here's the other thing, too. When you're an educator, you're connected to the students. You've built a relationship with them. You have been their personal cheerleaders at the time. You've also been the one that's kind of been like, hey, you shouldn't do this, but you should act this way, and let me show you how to get that more positive behavior. So I think it would be really hard for a teacher or even myself if there was an active shooter and I knew that student, like, I don't know if I'd be able to protect them.
I think that's what a lot of people are saying.
And I think that's me personally. And I work with, I work for a great school. I work for a great district. And we believe in building relationships with students. And if you believe in that and you believe you are a child's advocate, I would rather someone who is better trained be in my building to take care of an active shooter and let me deal with getting my students out of the building.
Right. So what other resources, what are some other ideas that you can think of for schools that might make them safer, if not arming?
I think the number one thing is building relationships with students. You must have a positive relationship with your student body.
Do you think there's enough people, enough of you at our schools, I guess is the question.
I would love more funding for guidance counselors. The school that I work at, we have 1,900 students, and there's 3 guidance counselors. That's an overwhelming... even though I have great administrators and I have great support staff, I really feel like, we have to find that funding for education and get more counselors and more resources into our school. Working with your student body, building relationships with them, part of it is just teaching them about if someone says something that makes you feel uncomfortable, whether it's on Snapchat, Twitter, text message, group conversations, whatever it is, when someone says something that makes you feel uncomfortable, tell a trusted adult and let the trusted adult take it through the due process. And even if you report something and it is nothing, which is our goal all the time, at least that child advocated for themselves.
Right.
I know, another thing is don't prop doors open, keep your building secure. And that's really easy for students. Somebody texts a student and say, like, hey, I just ran out to my car. Can you, let me back in the side door?
Right.
They don't do that maliciously. They're not thinking about, if I prop this door,
somebody could get in.
They're not thinking of those things. And so I think a lot of it's about educating them, about this is why we don't want you to prop the doors open.
Right,
and
exactly.
it's a school safety, and I know we don't want to think about anything bad here because we all like each other, but it's really teaching those students about reporting and having an adult advocate in every school.
So not every school has the same level of security. Would you advocate for rules that each school has to follow, or each school has to have a certain level of security?
I think the Kentucky Safe Schools does a really nice job of coming out and auditing schools and letting them know, like, hey, here's where we see some of your pitfalls, and that way you can get a plan in place to get rid of the pitfall.
But it's not required, though, to fix those problems, right?
It's not required, but to me, if you invite somebody to do an audit,
you're looking.
And you should be willing to allow someone to come in to audit your school for school safety. School safety is always going to be our number one priority. We want our students to be in a safe learning environment. We want our teachers to be in a safe learning environment. We want our cafeteria workers, our custodians, our bus drivers. So I think, working with the school, the Kentucky School Safe, that's safety, that's the best thing to do.
But you have to request that. So if a school doesn't want to know or do anything, they wouldn't have to request that then. And that's what I'm trying to say is, should there be a standard for all schools?
I definitely think there should be a standard for our schools to say, like, hey, we have this great resource in the state of Kentucky. They will tell you, here's some things
Once
to do.
a year or something.
Yeah, and it's research based, and they'll tell you, a lot of times you'll, they have some great resources, and you can log onto their website and see some of their great resources. And I think it's a great opportunity to go through.
Got it. Okay. So we're going to talk about voting rights and gerrymandering. That's a term that everybody
uses.
Cringes, right, when we say that.
Yeah.
But what would you do to protect voting rights and protect against gerrymandering? And then, additionally, do you support a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United?
So, I think the thing that's, we have to make sure that voters can get to precincts. That is the number one goal. So, to me, when you're looking at districts, who should vote where and who should vote there, it's not about like, okay, like, I'm kind of in a district that's kind of broken up. You've got this little piece of southern Boone County.
Look at them; they're so weird.
They're so weird. I'm like, okay, I've got this little chunk of Boone County, and I don't understand, like, why didn't they just put all Boone County with, southern Verona with northern Verona,
right.
kind of a thing. And, I think the things that we have to look at is we have to make sure that voters are able to get to a precinct.
Right.
That's the number one thing. And that's really what we need to focus on is when we do these districts is how many voters are in each precinct and what makes sense. It's hard for a legislator if you have 30,000 constituents and then the district over next to you only has 15,000.
Right.
So, is that really fair? Or is that really equal to make sure that everyone's lights...
Right.
Everyone's voice is being heard really in the state of Kentucky, so I think that's something.
Would you advocate for some of these computer programs? So they've got computers now that will tell us the best way to, divide up the districts. Would you advocate for that here in Kentucky?
Yeah, I think anything that we can use to decide, like, here's the best way to do it, to give us that data or information.
Great. What about Citizens United? That's more about the federal level.
I was going to say, I don't really know anything about Citizens United, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'll have to research that.
That was a question somebody had put in, but it's just money.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's basically money from corporations. I think it was stating that a corporation is like a person, and it can give money to a campaign. So it's kind of about campaign money. But that's more at a federal level.
Yeah.
So okay. Well, that's all the questions that we have. Is anybody, if anybody has any final questions to send to us, now's the time. If not, if you want to go ahead and just address our viewers again and just say, why should they vote for you, again, and here's your last couple minutes.
My last couple minutes, all right. Well, once again, thank you so much for tuning in and allowing me to answer these questions. And just, I think that's the best part about campaigning is getting out there and meeting people and hearing what your ideas are and your views and just really trying to do what's best for the citizens of Kentucky. And that's really my goal, is to represent the citizens of Kentucky and do the very best I can for you down at the state level. I hope that you will vote for me on May 22nd. I'm excited. This is my first go around. So it's an exciting time for me and my family and my friends. And, I just really want to do what's best for the state of Kentucky. I'm passionate about public education. I'm passionate about students. I'm passionate about the youth of Kentucky. And I think that we have to advocate for the future of Kentucky, and the best way to advocate for the future of Kentucky is by pouring resources into our students and our youth. Great. So I appreciate being here tonight.
Thanks so much for coming. Thanks. I really appreciate it, and good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.